Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final day of the Safety Nights Heat Safety Summit. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Dan Abatoy. I handle operations here at Safety Nights. So if you have any questions, feel free to toss it in the chat. I can get to that. Otherwise, I will also toss my email in here. Feel free to reach out at any point in time if I can help address any questions about the summit itself or anything Safety Nights related. That's what that's there for. So please take advantage of it. Second of all, if this is your first day to the summit and you haven't already registered your email, please do that quickly. You'll have received an email from Crowdcast, and that's just going to give you the ability to utilize the Q&A section and the chat section of the platform. So if you haven't done that already, please do that. And again, that email will be from Crowdcast. Secondly, there is that Q&A section. It's going to be that question mark icon on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to toss any questions that you may have for Tara in here. And again, if you already see a question in here and it really resonates with you, feel free to upvote that question. It's going to give us an indication as to how relevant and important that question is. Having said that, I think that's all the housekeeping items that we'd want to take care of at this point. So what I'll do now is, Tara, I'm going to turn the stage over to you. It's all yours.
Great. How's everybody doing? Afternoon. My name is Tara. I've been in safety since probably 2012. I was actually a safety coordinator to start with, and I've been mostly on federal projects since then. My first federal project started in 2014. Most of my work has been in the Southeast, although I have worked out west as far as Tooele, Utah, and in White Sands, New Mexico. And the conversation of heat actually got me here because the last time I was in White Sands, we had temperatures around 120. So when it comes to doing stuff with worker safety, it becomes kind of paramount on the safety officer to be able to get everybody on the same page and get everybody to work together. So my topic today is, are you ready? One of the things that I've noticed a lot when it comes to working with other safety officers is that they're okay with the day-to-day stuff, doing the inspections, doing regular day-to-day interactions, doing the walkarounds, doing the interactions with each other. But when it comes to an incident, they're not familiar with what to do in the case of an emergency. So my topic is, are you ready? So one of the things that I have found is most companies have a policy. The question is, do you know where the policy is? Do you know what you're supposed to do? What are your procedures? How are you supposed to go about handling an incident? So when it comes to planning these things, you don't want to wait until the day you get there to be ready to react. So how do you prepare your team? You know, what kind of training modules when you're getting into warm weather? And this being the springtime is the perfect time to start introducing these weekly toolbox talks and things like that can get people prepared. So you have your training modules that you can do, and you can break those down into little weekly chunks so that it's not all at once and people kind of glaze over and stop listening. You can actually break it down into weekly topics and do first aid. You can do signs and symptoms. You can do all kinds of things as far as breaking things down into separate modules. The second thing that is very difficult from either end, either from management side or from the crew side, is getting people to buy in to their own safety. And I say this because a lot of times I don't get as much pushback from the crews as I get from the management, but also there are times that I run across crews that are like very resistant to having to do things in a safe manner, or they just want to get in and get things done. And that's when you have to kind of get a little more cooperation and get some buy-in from them. Do you know your first aid plan? Does your crew know your first aid plan? Who needs to be notified? Do you have public notice? Have posters? Do you have anything out there that is giving people any guidance on who to contact? How many people are comfortable? Do you have a group chat? Do you know how to do your documentation? I found a lot of people are very good at the immediate reaction. You know what to do. You know you have to help people. You have to get medical, you have to get things arranged. But when it comes to documenting, um, they leave out times, they leave out witness names, they leave out photos, they leave out a lot of things that are essential to when you have to investigate at a later time, especially if OSHA becomes involved. Having that documentation is extremely important and extremely valuable. So don't miss that opportunity at the moment. And then finally, we also have to do some follow up. We have to make sure that the person who was injured or involved in a heat incident has been properly cared for, has been given, the right uh, contacts that they need, whether it's for, workers' comp or anything like that. So it does help us to have all these things fresh in our mind. And sometimes we can forget, especially coming out of winter. Nobody's really worried about heat. Everybody's drinking coffee and energy drinks. Nobody's worried about dehydration. Now that it's starting to warm up, it's going to change a little bit. So, heat related deaths in the United States from 1992 to 2022. This is from Bureau of Labor Statistics from 2024. Um, you can see consistently throughout all of these years that construction related fatalities are usually around 30%, 33%, 34%. So it's a third of all of the heat related fatalities in the US, and as far as workplace related. So we can see that that's going to be something that we have to stay consistently on top of. And in recent years, there's been a lot of attention on staying hydrated, making sure you're providing water, making sure you're having rest breaks and things like that. But we want to make sure that we're getting that into all of our environments. So, construction related fatalities, like I said, make up more than a third of the worker heat related fatalities. Um, but Bureau of Labor Statistics can only go by what's reported. The caveat in this report is that this is only based on what has been reported to them. So, in incidents where people have secondary problems related to heat, such as heat stroke and heart conditions and things like that, oftentimes they're not recorded as a heat related incident. They're related to what actually was the final blow that took them out. So sometimes it can be documented as dehydration, as a heart attack, as any kind of medical condition, but they often don't attribute it to the heat, even though heat is a mitigating factor. Um, there is a common thought that when you're giving people breaks and giving people extra water breaks and stuff like that, that you're losing production, you're losing time, you're losing, profit. And this is where I get the pushback from the employers. They don't want to give up the 10 or 15 minutes it takes for somebody to cool down. They don't want to have to provide extra ice, extra water. They don't want to have to give up somebody to go and retrieve extra ice, extra water. Um, but in the end, giving those things up just for a few minutes out of each day will allow you to continue working during that work day and still allow you to be productive and allow you to achieve your goals. And yes, it may be that it's not as fast as you want to reach that goal, but I can promise you the cost of doing so is going to be far less than it would be if you had an incident that you had to take care of: workers' comp, lost wages, lost employee, hiring a new employee. All of that adds up. And people often don't think about that cost when they're thinking about the offset. So, one of the ways that I get buy in is to remind employers that there's a much heavier cost to not taking these precautions. Another thing I can say, workers that feel empowered to speak up often save your company money, and they often save your company's reputation. And one of my favorite examples, and this is not heat related, but it's related to another weather related incident, which is lightning. Coming from Florida, one of the things that we face often is lightning. We have lightning strikes. I think Texas and Florida lead the nation in lightning strike fatalities every year. One of the things that I strongly encourage in all of our workers is that, make sure you say something. if I'm working on a 2 mile stretch of area that we're working on, or a quarter-mile stretch of area, I can't be everywhere at one time. So if you see something, speak up and say something, and you have authority for stop work. In this one situation, I was working at Okeechobee on the perimeter dam that they have around the lake, and we got called into a inspection where all of the management had to meet with the Army Corps of Engineers and discuss some inspection items. An employee that we only had with us for 2 months, 22 years old, very young, very green worker, had just come to us from the sugar companies, felt confident enough to go into our group chat, because we had a group chat for announcing any kind of lightning strike shutdowns. And he took a screenshot of the weather app that we use. He put it in the group exactly the way I do. And he felt confident enough to stop work after only being there for 2 months while I was away. And he did exactly what I would have done. And that incident right there, I use as an example because he acted quickly and he acted correctly. And we had bragging rights with the Army Corps of Engineers. And if you understand how that affects your reputation, when you have a very strong safety culture and when you have a very strong safety reputation, those things go into your credibility when you're applying to get bigger and better jobs and work with different entities, because you have that history of good reputation. And that goes into CPARs, it goes into different types of reporting uh, adjustments. There's different ratings that you have, but essentially it helps. So we all have had some kind of experience, even if it's just, not as a safety person, but having experienced some kind of accident or incident. So when it comes to heat casualties, there's always signs and indication. Almost always, you're going to have signs and symptoms well before you have an incident. So if your workers are aware of the symptoms and they recognize that they have somebody who is struggling or having some symptoms or needing some help, they can actually be your first line intervention. And this also, again, working from Florida, working with Florida Power and Light, sorry, I think I lost contact. Can you still see me?
Yeah, we can still see you.
Okay, thanks. So working with Florida Power and Light, doing a perimeter storm surge wall around one of their facilities, we had somebody operating a mini excavator up against a brick wall with the rising sun right in front of them. It was 80 degrees by 7 a.m. So by noon, he was very much overheated, and several of his coworkers intervened and made me aware that he was having some signs and symptoms of heat stress. And at the moment where somebody noticed that he was no longer sweating, they sent me a 911 urgent call. They had been trying to get him to come down from the operator seat for a while. But that valuable time before he actually becomes a casualty was saved because they were confident enough and had my contact information and had familiarity with the signs and symptoms and were able to let me know that an emergency was imminent before it became an emergency. So if you do end up having an incident, if you don't have somebody that takes action like that, and the observed symptoms, maybe they come on very quickly or you don't have really time to recognize or adjust, then you can have a heat casualty. And then immediately you have to know how to react to that. Where's your paperwork? What do you do? Who do you contact? How close is emergency services? These are all things that you should become aware of weeks, months, way back in the beginning before you even have crews on site. Where's your local response team? How fast can they get here? If you're working on, say, a controlled area, like working on a military base, do they have a military response team that'll get there faster? Do you have to call a special number? These are all things that you need to know ahead of time. And you can't necessarily count on a response team that you might think would naturally be there. We worked on a job clearing out culverts in Jacksonville, Florida, where there was a fire department right across the street. And they had never gone and asked them if they had anybody that could do confined space rescue. When I came on as a consultant and walked across the street to talk to the fire chief, we found out that they do not have equipment, nor do they have personnel trained for confined space rescue, and the right department to call was down the road. So we had to change all of their emergency access or emergency contact posters. So those are examples of preparation. So your response, you got to have properly trained personnel. Do they know first aid? Do they know um, who is the important people to contact? Do you have something worked out? Usually, when we do emergency drills, we have somebody that is designated to uh, contact supervision. You have somebody that's designated to contact 911. Most of the time, it's the safety officer that's going to be on 911 doing the reporting and making sure to gather all the information they can for the 911 operator while emergency services is inbound. If you have a large job site, do you have somebody designated that knows how to, knows it's their role to go to the front of the work area? We don't always have addresses for these construction sites. So, unless somebody has the GPS points memorized, we're going to have to give them the closest entrance and information to get to where we're at. Those few moments are essential. So if you have somebody waiting there to meet emergency services and they can take them straight back to the person that you're helping, it's going to save precious moments. Okay. Documentation. So, like I mentioned before, everybody is familiar with, you know, everybody has a process. Most of the companies have a standard safety policy. Most of the companies have procedures already established. The problem is familiarity. We know there's a book on a shelf somewhere, but we haven't looked at it in 6 months, a year, whatever, and there hasn't been any issues, which is fantastic. But in the event that you need it, do you know where it's at? Are you familiar with it? How long has it been since it was updated? Um, those are things that you should do periodically. I like to do quarterly reviews of our documentation and our witness statements and our information and make sure they're all still OSHA compliant. Make sure there isn't something else that we should be asking or doing, changes in the regulations. So those things help you remain familiar with those procedures so that you know where to go, what to do, who to contact. Make sure your contacts are current because, as we know, we don't always have the same people that we start a project with that we end a project with. And then when you follow up, you want to make sure that not only do you have all your documentation in place in case there's an investigation, but you want to make sure that you properly understand, is this OSHA recordable? Is this not? Is it just heat stress? What is the difference between heat stress, heat sickness, heat stroke? What is the severity? Make sure you understand all of that. Make sure you understand the reporting requirements of that. And then you also want to maintain contact with the person who was involved in the incident and make sure they're getting proper care and make sure that you go with them through the entire process of recovery until they come back to work. Sometimes it's a short period, sometimes it's a little bit longer. So is that pretty well familiar with everybody? Does anybody have any questions on that so far?
I don't see any questions at this point.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and take a step further. So preparing your team in advance, that is sometimes the hardest thing to get people to give you their time, their attention, their focus. And it's not just the older crowd, because the older crowd sometimes can be set in their ways. We do have some younger workers that are also, I'm just here to get it done. I'm just here to get a job done. I'm in a hurry. I just want to do my stuff and go home. What you have to really focus on is who is waiting for you to come home. And one of my superintendents like to say, I don't care if it's just your landlord waiting on your rent. Somebody needs you to come home. So how do we get buy-in from them to actually care about their own health? And how do we get buy-in from the employers to care about their employees? I have often heard from management that, well, that's not required by OSHA. I'm sorry, it is. When I've told employers that they're required to provide cool drinking water, I've been told that's not required by OSHA. I have to be familiar, because when you're challenged on regulations and things like that, and you know where that says it in the regulations, you're given a lot more credibility and a lot more timely attention to make sure that what you're getting out of it is a response that is quick and not fighting you. Okay. Um, it takes a few times for them to understand that you know what you're talking about. But when I can give them the exact regulation that I'm talking about, it helps. It helps a lot, because then they see that I'm not just pulling this out of opinion. I'm not just, you know, making this up. It's documented that there wouldn't be a rule if there hadn't been a lot of problems that caused the rule. So often educating the leadership on OSHA requirements is all you need, and that gets you your buy-in from them. Another thing is to show them that the cost of treatment for an injury, the cost of lost production, the cost of having to hire another employee, the cost of insurance rate increases. Those are all going to be things that you don't consider in the back end costs that could hurt the company, and not just in financial sense, but in future work sense. Because when you're working with industries like like military contracts and national park services and things like that, you have a modifier in your reputation that goes directly to safety. So in that modifier, they're going to take into account whether or not you've had multiple safety incidents, what your OSHA record is. They're going to um, keep a record of your safety compliance with. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar, but in most regular construction, it's OSHA 1926. But when you're working on federal projects, a lot of times they are going to refer to the Army Corps' EM 385, Engineers Manual 385, which is their safety manual. So, in addition to OSHA regulations, you have the Army Corps regulations, which are about 85% identical to OSHA, but then there's a few that are a little more stringent. National Park Services has another system they use. Energy management, they have their own NREL system. National, I forget the abbreviation, but it's NREL. Um, but you have to be familiar not just with OSHA, but with other things that are applicable. So when you're talking about the research cost, those hidden costs can be detrimental to your company if you're not prepared for those, and if they don't understand that that's how it could impact them. Another thing is to be prepared to explain how that benefit of rest breaks and prevention can actually be more productive in the long run than having to take longer breaks if you have an accident. Because when you take a few moments to sit and rest and you continue working, a lot of times you're going to reach your goal. It might be a little slower, but you're going to reach your goal. But if you end up having an incident and then there's an investigation, those are a lot of man hours you're losing to those kind of situations. So when you explain this to an employer and show them that, I realize that you have a goal, you have production, we have a contract deadline, we have things like that. I realize you have those things, but also we can get there like the hare and the rabbit. The slow and steady pace wins the race. So sometimes those approaches work, but generally they kind of get the message if you explain it to them in ways that are more relevant and meaningful to them. As far as the crew members, reinforce the response skills with your weekly training. So when you have your weekly toolbox talks, when you have your daily JSA review, whatever it is that you're doing, however you run your safety program, throw in some things about, how many ounces of water you're supposed to drink a day. What's the first aid for somebody with heat stress? What points on the body should you put cold water or cold water bottles to cool somebody off? Throw in some little trivia things like that once in a while, and help that stay fresh in people's memory. So those things kind of reinforce what you're teaching them in the weekly meetings, and then they end up retaining a lot more than just sitting through a class, because it's a slow trickle of reinforcement. Another thing you can do is either assign somebody, or you personally go around when your crew is out and check on their water coolers. Make sure they have ice. Make sure they have water. If they are running low or anything like that, bring it to somebody's attention. Most of my work has been as a general contractor, so generally what I do is when I'm checking coolers, I remind the person that is the crew lead or their superintendent, or whoever might be their foreman, hey, you need to get somebody on this. Make sure the ice is restocked after lunch or something like that. And that will help keep them attentive to what's going on with that. So, as I mentioned before, with reiterating training and conversations, again, most of my experience is coming from being the GC. So when I'm walking around, I'm not taking a lot of time to talk and distract people from work, but I might say, hey, trivia question, just for a couple of seconds, and then I'll tell them, good job, or say, oh, you're close, not quite, and then I'll give them the correct answer and move on. It's not interfering, it's not detrimental, but that kind of little bit of extra reminders tells them that, hey, it's not just when we're sitting in class that we have to pay attention to stuff like that. It's all day, all the time, all day. Um, oh, so that's about it as far as reiterating my training. Um, Essentially, all I want to get across to everybody is we need to ensure, like I said, are you ready? Okay. Um, Take the time, if you haven't done it in a while, review your company policies. Um, Change your training to be relevant to what you're doing. A lot of times I notice that safety people have a corporate safety office that sends down a topic or something like that they cover, but oftentimes if you're working in an industry where you guys have several different projects going on, that safety topic might not be relevant to what you're doing. So a lot of times people are not going to pay attention to the topics that you're teaching if they're not relevant to what you're doing at the time. So it would help if you guys maybe change it up once in a while and change things as we go into the seasons. We do cold weather when it gets close to winter. We do ladder safety when it comes close to Christmas because everybody's hanging Christmas lights. And we do things like hot weather training when we get into summer. And this is a perfectly timed conference. So think about those things when you're planning your safety training. Do we have any questions or anybody want to add anything, comments?
You must have done a great job because as of right now, we don't have any comments. But if you're typing a question or a comment, please feel free to continue to do that. I don't want to stop that. Um, I guess I actually do have a question
Mhm.
um, around the idea of, and we had talked previously about, different types of personalities and how you connect with them to get that point across of being safety oriented and safety first. Can you maybe like talk more around as you're looking at one person and talking to them versus somebody else who has a different personality
Mhm.
or view on safety, how you kind of change yourself or the talking points that you put out there to connect with those people in different ways?
Well, a lot of times it is personality driven. Unfortunately, it is a lot about how they feel like they're being perceived. Um, and a lot of times it's just because this is how they've done it forever. So you have different people, different personalities. Um, when you're dealing with somebody that is set in the way of this is how we've always done it, this is how I've always, been successful. I'm not going to change it. This is a plan that works. Unfortunately, workplaces change, hazards change, um, weather patterns change, And when I kind of bring up those concepts of, just because this worked last year or the year before or 5 years, it doesn't mean that it's going to continue working. And I'll bring up topics like, hey, did you see that we're having record heat waves? Did you see that we're having unusual rain patterns for this time of year? And I'll bring those conversations up and kind of enforce the idea that you can't always rely on things that have been a pattern for many years. um, and oftentimes when you look back and actually look at what they say has always worked, we also had a higher rate of incident in those times when they were practicing stuff like that. And having those conversations, like I say, whether it's before work, after work, at lunch, on break, um, trying to redirect that negative idea towards safety helps a lot. The other thing I find too is that when I first go onto a job and people don't know me, they're used to some kind of safety people that are safety cops, that are gotcha guys. They're out there to bust them. They're out there to get them in trouble. Overcoming that is often difficult because they have it set in their mind that you're just here to make trouble for them. You're here to make their job harder. You're here to just cause them grief. And I've had people look at me and tell me I don't speak English. And you just said that in perfect English. I don't speak English. And just be obstructive. So in those kind of situations, I just kind of have to work at it a little bit at a time and let them realize that I'm not here to get them in trouble, get them fired, get them sent home without pay. No, I'm not here to do any of that. I'm here to be a coach. I'm here to be an asset. I'm here to ask questions. I'm here to look out for you. And when people do come around to realizing that I am here to be a help, not a hindrance, it does kind of change attitudes. Um, but sometimes it's not immediate. You have to kind of work at it. I've had superintendents, especially because I do a lot of teaching for my companies. I've had superintendents heckle me in the class and tell me, "You're not going to teach me anything I hadn't learned 50 other times in these classes." And then I am very thorough in my classes, but I also require participation. I don't just stand up and preach to people. When I do my fall protection class, I have a 9-foot tripod and I actually have a crank and I let people go up and be suspended and try to put on trauma straps and let them learn what it's like to actually implement those things in a classroom setting where they're safe. And I have interactive classes. So at the end of the day, a lot of my teaching is hands on, it's not just lecture style. So it actually benefits a lot of people because, let's face it, a lot of people in the trades learn by doing. They're not rote memorization people. So they're handy people. Okay. When you're working with people that give you the opportunity to do things like practice CPR or, do a mock-up of, what happens if somebody has an injury, where do you put water bottles, or ice to cool them off? When you do stuff like that, that's interactive, when you're in a teaching environment, when it's safe, it's all funny. They think it's clowny and they get a little laugh about it because everybody's doing something out of the ordinary and it feels silly. But that really does, that muscle memory, that action, taking those actions and interacting with people makes a big difference, because when an incident does happen, they've actually done it once before or twice before if we did refresher training. And having that memory, and this is something I learned in the Marine Corps, having that muscle memory from repeatedly doing something with your own hands, taking those actions, is a great deal different than if you'd only ever learned it from a book or a lecture. So being interactive with your training is often beneficial in more ways than one. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, no, thank you. And I love, you touched on a lot of points there that reiterate, um, the importance of that training and doing things over and over again to the point in which you have that muscle memory. We've had some other speakers this week touch on that point as well. So hearing that again, I think just hammers home that point even more. At this point, I don't see any other questions coming in or comments.
Mm.
So I think we're probably and before I'll give everybody a few more seconds to toss some stuff in if you need to. But before we jump off and wrap this up, first of all, Tara, I want to thank you for taking the time and energy, the effort to be a part of this. I know you've had for the last couple of weeks working overtime and putting so to take the time to be a part of this. All I can say is thank you for that, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Absolutely. I'm glad, looking forward to have you back in the future as well. And to that point, I just want to take a second and thank all of our speakers from this week and everyone here who attended. Thank you. I hope that you're all walking away, with the tools and resources that you might need this summer to take on the heat and keep everyone safe. With that being said, as we wrap this up, everyone just be on the lookout for an email coming from us early next week. Within that, we'll have all the recordings from all of these sessions that you'll be able to download and keep with you and be able to look back on for whenever you want. So that email will be coming early next week. So be on the lookout for that. And having said that, and since it doesn't look like we have any other questions, I guess what we'll do is we'll wrap this up. And again, thank you everyone for being a part of the Heat Safety Summit. Tara, thank you again. And I look forward to seeing everyone at our next Safety Summit. So be on the lookout for that as well. Until then, everyone have a great weekend, and I hope you stay safe in the sun and heat, and have a great summer.